Good night, villagers.
Yes, I.
Welcome to
What's
another
boy?
episode of Heights Room.
Nice.
What are you saying there, fellas?
Well, I still navigating him.
Oh yeah, we're on a new platform now.
Yeah. I still getting a little bit of the T-Fed here.
Right.
Yeah, no
Change
problem.
that, boy. Change
To
that,
do
boy.
everything from the screen here.
Right.
We in the dance there.
In the dance there now.
In the dance.
For the 3 panel there?
The tree, let me try this one.
Right.
I see best looking one out of all there. So
you must see
yeah. All our we pan.
You know, a little disoriented tonight.
Yeah. Well, boy, yeah, let's stay in the fight. You know it is.
Yeah. It's mad scene out there right now, boy. It's mad scene out there.
Mm-hmm.
Real mad scene.
So what's going on, fellas? Everybody good? Everybody safe? Kota, here you get a vaccine. Bill Gates talking to you yet?
Actually, Mao talking to me. Getting dreams of
from
Mao.
the afterlife.
Yeah, dreaming Mao.
So dog, I hear we boy the man himself, top dog Donnell. I believe he's the youngest dead from COVID, or at least one of the youngest people who died from COVID.
One of the youngest. I think there was a younger. I believe there was one. I can't remember. I can't say off guard, but he's definitely, I would say, the first social media sensation from Trinidad to go to COVID. One of the few people who actually in that social media realm, people, all the youths know him. You know, I of course was a big fan of Donnell, and you know, it hit me hard. It hit me hard, you know, because like I used to look forward to hearing Donnell talk and seeing him be, you know, heightsy and wild and thing. And I'm somebody who you know grew up around people with his condition, you know, so I'm accustomed to their jovial mood and that kind of thing. So, you know, for me, a lot of people, you know, they would have really felt the burn when when they get on news now. I know a lot of people didn't expect to be toting the way they're toting, so right now over the Donnell boy. But as you could say, where you're really telling yourself.
We're really telling yourself.
Yeah.
That's Donnell I get that from.
That's Donnell, yeah, that's
you know, he was like,
man there, boy.
Yeah, he used to like the heel zest, he used to like his belly, you know. I was playing to get a little something here, but I get thrown off too. I wanted to put up a little something, but we'll probably link that later or something. Let me just say that, you know, condolences to the family of Top Dog Donald Phillips, you know.
Yes,
to all his friends and people in the camp, you know, who used to run his social media and thing. I know they're feeling a big loss at this point in time. You know, he was a soldier and a real agent for positivity in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes,
because he always used to put a smile on your face, and it was always good to see that level of inclusion when you see his post now that he lineman with the boys, he out there, you know, he was very close to Darren Bravo. Darren Bravo was his like neighbor.
Oh really?
Yeah, so he used to always be
from Santa Cruz.
He's from Santa Cruz. So he used to always be in Darren Bravo posts, and they used to be lineman hard. And I know that whole community is hit very hard by his loss. So you know, rest in peace, Donnell. You know,
rest in peace, Donnell. Yes, Top Dog himself.
And speaking of the COVID situation, today was day of how to put it?
Chaos.
Mad scene in the morning. Smart scene in the morning. So today was the first day of the walk-in rollout. Now, from the minute I hear on the weekend that we'll be taking strictly walk-ins, first come, first serve, I stop and I tell myself, this man serious? Like, are we going to really walk-in, first come, first serve for this vaccination across the country with the 30-odd health centers we have with vaccines right now? Are we really telling ourselves that that's going to be a good scene? So I was awaiting some kind of further communication about that. And there was none. And lo and behold, this morning, it was just a total mad scene now. You know, it was just total chaos. Because what you have is people rushing because people are accustomed to rushing for whenever they know they have to get something when it is public service. So since 5 o'clock, people line up and things. So I don't know what we're really telling me. So,
but I mean, the only thing though, Cutter, I mean, who wouldn't expect that? You understand what I'm saying? I mean, you know, we must expect
people.
Let me take a look at somebody rush here now.
Telling me that it have no social distancing going on here. Look at the back canal here.
Don't go and take no vaccine.
Watch.
Don't go and take no vaccine because like there no COVID there. What's that, girl?
It have no COVID there. What's that, girl? You telling me? Nah.
You telling me?
Nah. No way, Jose. Yeah.
I'm trying to save the people of killing.
Killing people, boy.
Well, I guess you didn't see the video, but you hear the madness.
I study if it's just me now, boy. But yeah, I mean, all of bear with me. We learn any tech right now. But you know, you see, what I don't understand, right, is like this is supposed to be rolled out primarily for elderly people and for people who are not elderly but have comorbidities. But as the focus has always been for the longest while, the elderly people. You really expect elderly people, we're talking over 60, we're talking Tanti, right? And so on, to be stand up in that kind of line, dog? What kind of, that's inhumane, man. Again, it's inhumanity as we've seen right through. And I really don't understand how we could think that, okay, let me try it and see how it goes. You shouldn't gamble at people. I mean, this is safety, dog.
Yeah.
You're making that kind of grouping up. Like, this safety, you're putting people at health hazard. You can't be doing that. All you had to do was say to yourself, okay, we're going to roll out vaccines. We're going to have, these are the categories by which the walk-ins can happen. If you're living in this area, XYZ, so today they come now and apologize and say that's how you're going to use alphabetical order and so on, and they're going to do over 60. Why wait for this to happen then to say that? But again, people will say they're learning, they're standing like if they're in kindergarten. You understand? They're learning. I don't know.
I hear you, but here's the part that's confusing to me, and it's probably because I just don't know, right? So I little ignorant, so I want to learn. I thought AstraZeneca had run out, and that's why they went to Sinopharm, which was 100,000, and they was basically scheduling people with the Sinopharm. I know somebody close to me tried to get on the Sinopharm thing, and they say no, Sinopharm done, so we had to hold out. All of a sudden now we come back with AstraZeneca. Is it like it's a new shipment of AstraZeneca that come in, and therefore they just saying, well, fireburn the scheduling now?
Well, I'm not sure what's going on. Again, somebody in the comments could probably enlighten us on that. Yeah, enlighten us on that. What is happening is that with the initial set of AstraZeneca went out the window. It was finished. And we had Sinopharm, right? And Sinopharm has been rolling out in all the health centers. To my knowledge, I think it was still Sinopharm is the main thing being rolled out. I don't know. I would think that because just this week people was getting Sinopharm. So I don't think today it would have been AstraZeneca. It would be. There is, however, AstraZeneca that came as gifts that they are given to teachers and so on. Right, and they're given to people in the
front lines.
Yeah, like different things now that they would have. So right now, teachers are getting AstraZeneca because that was a gift from one of the islands. So they use that gift to go towards the teachers, and that is really rolled out at UTT and so on. So that's a different thing. So I mean, it have all kind of things going on. Honestly, the vaccine situation in Trinidad is all over the place. It's a all over the place thing. It is a real all over the place thing.
What's this talk about that here? Health centers only have like 100 vaccines to give out and 60 vaccines.
Every day they have like a batch kind of thing now, from what I understand. It just be like that because again, they're not gauging how, because remember, they were looking at appointments. And when you're looking at appointments and you're looking at, let's say the average person getting vaccinated takes probably it's like 15 minutes to get the jab from waiting to getting in or whatever, probably from when you walk in the center, because you're waiting outside most of the time. Right? But then you have to wait, and you have to remember social distance stuff. They have to make you wait 20 minutes after you get jab and so on, and they have to test your blood pressure and make sure your vitals good. So you're looking at the fact that with the appointment system and with these things that have to happen, they would have averaged that, well, we go work with this amount because during a day we can handle this amount and next day. But now they don't know how much they're really going to get when they have the walk-in. You have hundreds of people outside. I'm not sure what is the logistics with it. And then they would have less than they need, because many times people went to get vaccinated in the afternoon and they did not have enough for them. People with appointments, that happened to many old people. They went for their appointment in the afternoon and they didn't have enough. I don't know how, but again, I don't know what is going on there. I don't know what's going on there. I really don't know.
But what trigger moving towards this? Again, I just trying to get the logic. What triggered it moving to this first come first serve system? What was the reason? Because it was already not working good. So is it that what happened?
The minister said that they got feedback, right? Feedback.
But there was always getting feedback. You know, I just say what happened so bad. You know,
don't know. I
so
don't know.
we
don't know.
this. We had a, you know, don't give me that.
I am expected to be dotish. I realize I am expected to be
dotish.
No. They said that they got feedback that the appointment system is not working for the majority of the population because the people not getting responses, and also people are not able to use the WhatsApp, not able to call the number over and over.
Right.
They're talking about Tanti and thing. So now he's saying first come, first serve. And then I'm like, but how that make it better for all people?
Exactly, Kota. That is the problem I have. I don't mind you saying if you're sure, okay, we have to make a change. Don't change to something worse.
Exactly.
How could you possibly think this is going to be better? No, at the end of the day, don't get me wrong. Everybody stressed, everybody at the limit, you know what I mean? Everybody, you know, trying the best and whatnot and thing. But what we're saying is everybody understood this is something that, you know what I mean, is people health, is people livelihood that out there and thing. Let me get a little more care now, man. Let me get a little more care. You know what I mean? Think about the system a little more. Think about how you put the right people to come up with the system. You understand what I'm saying? And let them walk it through more sensibly, because this can't be making sense, way. And then now they're jumping up with alphabetical. So what you're saying, people in A more important than people in B? Come now.
That happens, eh? They do that.
That does happen. Yeah, in Barbados that happen. Yeah,
that's something they have to do from time to time.
To go in the,
no, but it's something when you have enough.
Right.
When you have to have enough.
Right.
If you are 60, you saying everybody in A, and then you have to wait for the next shipment. You see, that was I don't know how you're managing.
A to E with 30 odd health. If I'm not mistaken, it's 30 something health centers across Trinidad, right?
Yeah.
A to E. As a man say, we have plenty A and B. We have plenty Ali. So we go see what's going on. All right. I suspect that this is going to be very wild again tomorrow and so on. I suspect it to be a mad scene still for a little while. All right. Mm-hmm. With that being said, is there anything else you guys want to talk about before we move on to the main topic?
Yeah, well, you know, we are what time we are there?
We are 8:45 there, so I think we could. Well, the birds from Wildfall Trust, that is sad. That's
yeah,
sad.
Boy.
That is.
That one was. I watched that. I like the Tiefin bird now, boy. I mean,
I didn't even know the Wildfall Trust was still operational. To be honest, I was quite surprised. Pleasantly surprised.
I know a couple. Yeah, I know a couple vets inside of there and think them real, you know, they're really trying the best with what they have and thing now, boy. So I mean, for thief to go in there now and try and take, and apparently it's like some of the best birds they going with. Apparently it's like they say some breeders or something. I like Jed. What kind of?
That's our inside job. That's our inside
job. True.
That's how nasty people is us. You get how else you're going into that compound? How else you're going to compound? Going in the Wildfall Trust, picking up so much bud, right? And getting out. That's our inside job. And this is how it is out here, dog. You know? But that being
different.
All right. Well, that being said, my head hot.
Yeah. Well, it's a hot night.
Yeah, it's a hot night. Right? Now, those of you who have been following up with our updates would know that tonight we set aside to deal with a certain topic, and this is the topic of the Venezuelan refugee crisis in Trinidad. Now, to give us insight into the refugee situation, we needed to get people who are qualified in this area. And I'm pleased to present two guests tonight. So we have two. So again, two for the price of one, right? Tonight, we have with us a longtime friend of mine since he was Pickney, right? Mr. Mattieu Ramsawak, right? Mr. Mattieu Ramsawak is an international development specialist, and he is here tonight as the Senior Community-Based Protection Assistant at the UNHCR TT. So welcome, Mattieu. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Good night. Special good night to you, Cutter, my brethren from a long time. We grew up in Gasparillo.
Big up, boss. Big up, boss. Boss is the boss.
Government.
Boss is the boss that never lost, they say.
Boss
is the boss that never lost.
You guys tonight.
Yeah, man, brother. Also, on the show, so we had to keep it balanced too. So another friend of mine, but someone who I don't know since a little Pickney, right? We have Amanda Choo, Quan, Trinidad Jamaican writer and activist, and also Amanda has worked with the UN Refugee Agency in this country as well. So thank you so much. Big ones. So thank you so much. Hi, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. You guys, you all coordinate well and come through in good time and all of that. I tell you, my head real hot. I wasn't sure if everybody was on the inside and thing because I had a little emergency take place just now there, but we here, we good to go. All right. So let me get into this one. Yeah, let me get into this thing one time. All right. So before we get into the line of questioning and so on, Mattieu, can you give us a little breakdown of what the UNHCR is, or also known as the UN Refugee Agency?
Yes, certainly. So UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, it's a long title, but known as the UN Refugee Agency for short, has been in existence for over 50 years. It was created post-World War II, as many other UN agencies were done, essentially as a project to help the world to heal from the devastation of the world wars, but also to help address some of the big problems in the world that resulted from the world wars. And of course, one of the major problems would have been mass displacement of people, right? So the UN Refugee Agency was created essentially with the mandate of trying to build a collective effort globally to deal with refugees and asylum seekers. It included, of course, putting together legislation, helping to define exactly who refugees and asylum seekers are, defining a broad range of circumstances that can create situations of displacement, and essentially just working with governments and other international agencies to build functioning asylum systems across the world. So UNHCR's primary function, again, is to assist governments to help build functioning asylum systems and to help provide unrestricted access of refugees and asylum seekers to asylum systems in each country.
Oh, that clears it up for us there. So the UNHCR is also referred to as the UN Refugee Agency as well. Okay. Mattieu, so first of all, I would like you, for our viewers who may not know, what is the difference between a migrant and a refugee?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm sure most people would have heard the words refugee and migrant sort of used interchangeably, in media, public discussions, and so on. There is a very crucial legal difference between the two terms. So confusing them, there's also conceptually a big difference. And I think confusing those two terms can really be, can lead to a lot of problems for refugees and asylum seekers, as well as just general misunderstandings on the topic of migration and of seeking asylum. So refugees, in the most general sense, are people who have fled their countries of origin due to war, conflict, persecution, or threat of persecution, have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. They often flee their countries of origin with nothing more than the clothes on their back, many times without legal documentation and so on, oftentimes having to make treacherous journeys just to get to safety. The 1951 Refugee Convention is a big international sort of like document where countries all around the world who are signatories have gotten together to define what refugees are more specifically, as well as to outline what rights and responsibilities, what rights refugees have and what responsibilities countries have towards them. You can find the the Refugee Convention online if you're interested to know more about it. Right. The term migrant, on the other hand, is an umbrella term and is not strictly defined under international law. It refers widely to many different categories of people in different situations. So generally speaking, persons who have moved away from their country of residence or habitual residence temporarily or permanently, and for a variety of reasons, most commonly to better themselves economically, for work, many times for education, for family. So the term can include, so migrants can encompass a number of different, more well-defined legal categories, such as migrant workers, different, persons who are moved irregularly, such as smuggled persons who have been trafficked, and then there's persons who may not be as clearly defined legally, such as international students and so on. So the main difference is that migrants choose to move around not because of a direct threat of persecution or death, but mainly to improve their lives, whereas refugees really cannot safely return home, right? Migrants usually can return home safely without fear for their lives, and can also generally receive protection from their governments, whereas refugees and asylum seekers, the protection that should be afforded to them by their governments is usually compromised.
Right. So this concept of asylum, Mattieu, right? And seeking asylum, would this be a human right? That, when we talk about rights of people, is asylum a human right? And can you just unpack a little bit what asylum really means to the human being?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, in its most simple terms, asylum is the process of seeking safety and protection from persecution or fear of persecution, while seeking out the status of a refugee, of being a refugee, right? And we already spoke about what refugees were a bit earlier. Asylum seekers, seeking asylum is a fundamental human right of anybody who is fleeing to find safety. This right is enshrined in a number of different international instruments and conventions, including the Refugee Convention, but also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention Against Torture, among others. Trinidad and Tobago has been a signatory of the International Refugee Convention since the year 2000. So yes, and the Refugee Convention outlines a little bit more sort of like some of the broader conditions, specific guidelines in certain circumstances, which help to guide countries to understand the situation of asylum seekers a bit more. So yeah, everybody has the right to seek asylum, because everybody obviously has the right to safety and security, right? But it's important to note that seeking asylum should not and is not intended to be used as a means of protecting somebody from, say, like running from having committed a crime in their country of origin. That wouldn't be a grounds.
Qualify, yeah.
Definitely. All right, so let me ask something to Amanda here, because I know Amanda does get a little juicy at times, right? Amanda.
Yes, Kata.
Where would you say Venezuelans fall? Under the category of migrants or under the category of refugees? And why?
Right. Okay, so this is a tricky question because we are told frequently through the media and by the language that the government uses that Venezuelans fall under this category of economic migrants. The truth is not quite that. That is not the absolute truth. So when I was at UNHCR, you would talk about mixed migration flows, but also at the end of my tenure at UNHCR, there was a consideration for the fact that all Venezuelans fleeing are to be considered persons of concern. So essentially, all Venezuelans who are fleeing their country, who are displaced, the UNHCR essentially was made to consider them as people who are in need of protection, international protection in some way. So that is again to say that that we do need to consider Venezuelans asylum seekers. We can't consider all Venezuelans refugees because, as Mattieu said, to be considered a refugee, you have to go through a process that is enshrined in this convention. But in order to be considered an asylum seeker, really all you have to do is declare an intent to seek asylum in the country in which you flee to. So yes, I would consider most Venezuelans. You can't consider all Venezuelans refugees or asylum seekers because, you know, I don't know. It's impossible to know why every Venezuelan is here. And of course, we do know that there are Venezuelans here who have been here for a while, you know, with permits, to Trinidadians and so forth. But there are valid reasons, and I guess that gets really to the meat of the matter. And I know that, you know, in the UN, there are conventions and there are treaties and there's all this language. But the truth of the fact is that the UN did undergo a fact-finding mission in 2020, spoke to people and found that their government was, you know, could be held responsible for committing atrocities against Venezuelans that fall under conventional, quote-unquote, reasons for. And when I say conventional, I mean, so it's a little bit complicated, but I'll try to simplify it. So essentially, you have this convention. You have this convention, right? The 51 Convention. The 51 Convention, as Mattieu said, is a tool from it's a World War II relic. So the convention itself lays out the conditions by which someone should be considered a refugee, as well as the rights that they are entitled to. So if you read the convention, you will see that basically the definition of a refugee is fleeing because of fear of, I'm sorry, I'm very much butchering the definition, but it is fleeing due to a well-founded fear of persecution that falls into certain categories, right? So when people sort of typically think of a refugee, they might be thinking of someone who is fleeing due to belonging to a social, this is part of the convention. So for instance, and the UN considers a social group or belonging to, you know, a religious group, belonging to a particular race or ethnicity. All of this stuff is outlined in the convention, right? But because the convention is a World War II relic, it isn't well equipped for modern times and for modern kinds of conflict, right? So in Venezuela, you see that the conflict is layered, and one thing can cause something else. And this is even before we get to that UN fact-finding report that literally stated that there are human rights abuses being committed in Venezuela, even before. Can you all hear me, see me well?
We're hearing you fine. We're hearing you fine, which is enough because the video feed has frozen. Okay, it's back. All right, good.
Sorry, I just closed off some tabs on my laptop, and I live down the island, so the internet kind of sketched.
So that probably just threw off your computer a little bit.
Yeah. I hope I'm better. I'm not.
Yeah, you're good. No,
okay,
I can
see we can see the walk like an Egyptian. We see an Egyptian walk and stuff.
Okay, no, it was vulgar, but okay. All right, I'll take
it was okay. Sorry.
But to get back to the point, which we I guess we have to do to get back to the point. So modern kinds of conflicts aren't necessarily all covered by the convention. And when I say modern kinds of conflicts, you know, the fact that there are Latin American countries that, you know, like Venezuela, let's use Venezuela, that Venezuela is undergoing a crisis that is multi-layered in that, yes, there's a severe economic crisis, but there's also severe violence, poverty, hunger, causing many different things, lack of access to medication, which means widespread disease, and so on. So basically generalized violence. So there actually are, and to get back to that, there actually are updated protocols and agreements that will cover that kind of generalized definition of a refugee. I feel as though people don't really know this, but for instance, there's the Cartagena Declaration. And again, I know it's the UN, so there are lots of these declarations and so on. The Cartagena Declaration is a declaration signed by Latin American countries, not Trinidad and Tobago, but basically agreeing to this generalized definition of a refugee and agreeing on cooperating in order to solve issues together regarding refugees. Trinidad, however, was present at the Brazil Declaration, which actually sort of reinforced some of the principles of the Cartagena Declaration, meaning that Trinidad and Tobago as a country actually has participated in some of these mechanisms that decide on what happens to refugees. It's just that that's not
so
information that
we have a framework.
Well, I mean, we do have a framework. The framework is first in the 51 Convention. In fact, there's also, and again, not a lot of people know this, but there's actually, by the previous administration, it developed a draft policy that was accepted by cabinet. And that draft policy, if anyone Googles, is online. And actually see, because UNHCR basically, its position is that the UN system should not be handling asylum seekers, because it's a process. It's like if you apply for a visa and you line up, it's a step-by-step process. You have to gather your documents, you have to go and line up in the line, you have to get an appointment, you have to sit down in a chair, you have to wait, you can't carry nothing. It's a process. And so it's the process of seeking asylum. So that process typically should, from UNHCR's perspective, be handled by the state. So if you look at the draft policy, you will see that there was actually a plan for it to be handled by the state. What has happened since is, well, in the news, basically.
So
everybody see it.
All right. So let me get back to something here. Okay, let's see. You wanna come in and see?
Yeah. Amanda, one question. So if there exists a policy, is it then that the moving this forward is simply a question of money to finance the plan from this policy and a political will?
So just to be clear, there's no policy. There is an approach, a draft approach to developing a policy. Again, the bureaucracy. So there's no policy, just to be super clear. There is, if you look at the document in layman's terms, it almost looks like instructions as to how to go about doing this. Like what should, and it does lay out, it is detailed, and it does say, okay, refugees should be entitled to ABCD, education, this, that, and so on. It also states the NGOs that should be helping. It states, honestly, just Google it. It has everything there, and I'm not doing a good job of representing it in its entirety.
No. We can clear from what you're saying.
The general just
okay, cool.
Yeah. So, but then tell me this, Amanda. Who then makes the decision of if you have X people coming in? So let's say you have 10 people coming in from Venezuela. Who makes that determination? Well, you're a refugee, you're a migrant, you are asylum seeker. Who is the person that makes that determination? Because it seems like there are different paths to treating with each person. So I mean, there seems to be a lot of power in that determination. Who makes that determination?
Right. I mean, I think Mattieu could step in that in explaining the process, like the logistics. I think because it is a process.
Right now, Mattieu process, it's stopping. Mattieu, we're hearing you.
Apologies. Never done moment. Never done moment.
Like the headlights look too. It's looking as a vibe. So you just
So never done moment with my internet connection at home. So I trust in the mobile data now to carry. Apologies.
So
could you just repeat the question there as I was connecting my audio?
Yeah.
Sure.
So Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, to answer your question, okay, so I'll tell Mattieu the part that I thought that he could answer, but basically, the question was about how do we determine who is a refugee, who is an asylum seeker, who is a migrant, and so on. So basically, ideally, and who is supposed to be managing that process. So ideally, like we said, the state should be managing that process. UNHCR is managing that process, or was, almost as an interim measure. If you read the draft policy, or rather the draft approach to establishing a policy, you will see that clearly laid out. So essentially, how that process works is that, like I said, this is a right that we all have, party to the convention. For instance, if one of us decides that we are being persecuted and we go into the US, again, the system does not function the way it should, but we should be able to, declare an intent to seek asylum, and then that makes you an asylum seeker, nothing else. What you do is, you present yourself in Trinidad to UNHCR. There's also a pre-registration process that happens at Living Water. And basically, you kind of go through step-by-step a process of registration, and then a process of refugee status determination. And then if it is that you are determined to be a refugee, there are some solutions that might be open to you. I think Mattieu can qualify the logistics of that. If you are not determined to be a refugee, then you're basically privy or subject to the immigration laws of the country. And those immigration laws will basically, as they exist now, they criminalize illegal entry. So you would be subject to deportation. I'm not sure if Mattieu wants to add anything to that process.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much just kind of hit everything on its head, Amanda. Just to recap a little bit and to add a few little things. So all signatories to the Refugee Convention, part of the substance of what they've signed on to is a commitment to ensure access, unrestricted access to an asylum procedure. Now, each country has the right to sort of like build within its own legal framework an asylum system which works, an asylum, so to determine things like what the parameters are. They can use the Refugee Convention as a guideline, but also countries also do adjust based on their context locally. But the one unifying factor is that all those who are seeking asylum must receive unrestricted access to the procedure, must be given information on the procedure in a language that they can understand, and must be helped to understand what they can expect as they go through the procedure. So here in Trinidad and Tobago, we helped the country, UNHCR helped to contribute to a draft refugee policy, I believe in the year 2014, 2015. But currently the local legislation, despite being a signatory of the Refugee Convention, has not changed, has not altered itself basically to be able to sort of like deliver on some of the responsibilities that are outlined in the Refugee Convention. So in terms of the asylum process itself, as soon as someone has identified themselves or is recognized as someone who is thought to be an asylum seeker, there is a pre-screening that is done. UNHCR partners locally with Living Water Community to undertake this procedure. And so Living Water Community will basically take some general information down on the person, assess their immediate needs, and then persons will be referred to the UNHCR office to complete their sort of like registration. And the asylum process is essentially collecting as much information as possible on the individual, in terms of their history, in terms of what their story is, and as much information as is possible, basically, to sort of like begin to examine their claim. There is then a procedure whereby each individual case is interviewed at length. Interviews can be several hours long, and there can be multiple interviews. And all of this information is used against data that is collected regularly on the situation in the country and so on, essentially to sort of like build a profile of each individual case and match it against the refugee definitions that exist. So cases that match the definition obviously will be granted the status of refugee. and those who do not, who are not granted refugee status, they do have, I believe it's a 30-day period in which they can appeal the decision. The case will be revisited and so on, and then if the appeal is not successful, then as Amanda mentioned, the person will then become subject to the local immigration laws, and whatever actions immigration sees fit to take at that point is the prerogative of them. Those recognized refugees are then, you know, the idea is to search or seek out what we call durable solutions, which are like long-lasting solutions that will allow for people to live the highest quality of life possible in the long run.
All right, Matt. So it's a lot. It's a lot of information, right? That we're getting here. So I just want to bring it back to like some fundamental points here, just to make sure we're on the same page and that the viewers on the same page. So if a person from Venezuela reaches our shores, right? They aren't automatically a refugee unless they go through the process of seeking asylum.
Essentially, yes. So
correct.
Essentially, yes. No one can be well, in very probably like in certain situations where the person's situation may seem obviously dire, but generally speaking, a person has to go through the refugee status determination process to be deemed a refugee or not. But as Amanda mentioned a bit earlier in the podcast, given the widespread nature of the situation in Venezuela in particular, the widespread nature, the well-documented situation where people are facing violence sort of like on a day-to-day basis and so on, all Venezuelans fleeing the country at this point in time are considered de facto asylum seekers, right? It just means that when they arrive, they should all sort of like go through this process of determining whether or not they are refugees or not. And not all of them, of course, will meet the definition, depending on the circumstance, but everyone will especially those who actively seek it out, will go through the process.
Now, I think, you know, a lot of locals, they don't really understand the nature of the unrest and the economic situation in Venezuela. You know, they're not really informed about it, you know, and I think that's sad, because maybe if they were to really put themselves in the shoes of the people who are coming to our shores, they might understand why they are here. But tell me this, we are looking at the fact that, you know, the refugee is one who is going through these dire circumstances, right? And that they have to come here. Now we have a situation where a lot of refugees are asking for repatriation, on a lot of Venezuelans, because again, it's kind of hard for us to say who actually falls under the refugee actual status, because again, we don't know how much we're able to go through that process. But I will still use the word loosely, right? We have refugees who right now, you know, you're seeing it in the papers that they want to go back home because of what's going on here with our lockdown and so on, and because it's really hard. You know, it's really hard for them to really make ends meet because they came here with nothing and now there's nothing to do to really make a living and so on. So with that in mind, does that somehow, would you say, Amanda, let me ask you, do you think it negates in any way the case that Venezuelans are not economic migrants but are indeed fleeing you know, for their lives, so to speak?
I think what it does is that it does mean, well, first of all, I'll say I don't think that all, I mean, literally, as I was talking to you, it's mind-blowing, but somebody who works in the field just told me about women who had been raped, and like I just got that a minute ago, and cases of people who were victimized in the worst ways, cases that if you work at UNHCR, you have to deal with every single day. Moving along, I think what people, I think there's a fundamental, remember I said that the 51 Convention is a relic, it's an old instrument and it does not suit modern definitions of conflict, disaster, and war. I think that term economic migrant is used to villainize people for trying to seek a better life. But I also think that there's a difference between trying to seek a better life because if you go back, you will starve to death, and trying to seek a better life because, you know, like I'll use myself for instance. I want to work in as an entertainer in the entertainment industry. I know that to write for movies, that would mean that I would need to go to live in the US. People go just to, I'm just using myself because I am not a refugee, and I would be what one consider an economic migrant because I want to go to school, I want to do a PhD, I want to get a job in the United States. But I mean, refugees here, when you're talking about economic migration, you're talking about leaving because, your child, you cannot get baby food for your child because you have to break your, and this is stories I've heard personally, yeah, because you have to break your better parts for gas, to so that you won't, so for warmth, things like that. So that, for instance, there's a story I heard of one person who was middle class, and who, had a degree just like the rest of us, who eventually realized that the food that his mother was giving him was growing smaller and smaller. So from eating spaghetti and meatballs like a typical sort of middle class meal, it was just ketchup, and then you kind of realize eventually you're losing weight, and you're kind of yourself losing 20 pounds, 30 pounds, and you're kind of diminishing until you are nothing. Like, these are actual things that I have been told by people face to face. And that's what I mean. We use this term economic migration to villainize people. We say that Venezuelans coming in are illegal, but we don't give them other options. And when I say we, I mean specifically the government. I'm not afraid to say that. We don't give them other legal options for coming. In fact, we make the options more difficult. We impose visas, which are difficult to get in Venezuela to travel to Trinidad. And so, and I mean, that is how it works. For instance, if you, and I know I'm rambling, but I have so many points to make, and I will stop so that other people can talk. But for instance, you look at Kamala Harris, right? And what she said in Guatemala. And the fact that what she said is also incredibly misinformed, because you can't tell people not to cross a border if it is that they are fleeing for their lives, and if it is that they are relying on a tool of international law and a convention to do so in order to exercise their right to seek asylum, moving right along. Basically, policies of deterrence have been researched and found not to be effective. So, for instance, when I say policies of deterrence, I mean trying to find ways to strengthen borders, trying to find ways to turn people back, trying to find ways to tell people not to come. They don't work. This is what the research shows, because people who are desperate enough to come will come.
Come regardless.
They will come regardless. So, I mean, Trump had some of the cruelest. Exactly. Trump had some of the cruelest, strictest, most embarrassing and most shameful ways of trying to stop people from coming, tearing children apart from their parents. Which, if you are on any side of the political fence, you cannot deny that is a cruel thing to do. That it did not stop.
It didn't stop people.
It did not stop people from coming. Even during COVID, there were measures. I mean, the US put a measure in place that basically said, because of COVID, we have a right to reject you at the border. What that did, because of COVID, it did not stop people from coming. It stopped the category of people who were coming. So it stopped families from coming. Instead, you would see single adults coming. So basically, what that means is that human will is stronger. If you want to save your child's life, you see that kind of love? It's like Harry Potter. It's stronger. It's stronger than anything. It's stronger than any policy, any border, anything any government can do. If my child, I don't have a child, but basically, if I had one, and I know that, and I knew that right now I had to leave because life or death, as a woman, I go on, Like I will take that risk, because if it is that I die here, or I might live somewhere else, of course I'm gonna try to live.
Right, of course. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, Amanda, and I'm gonna bring this to Mattieu. So Amanda mentioned that women have their specific struggles in becoming migrants, and you see the dynamics of the type of people that come. You see families don't come. So what are the struggles that you have seen or heard of or experienced, like from the struggles that men face when they are migrants? Because sometimes you always hear these stories that the men go and leave the child and send for the child after, or send for the wife after, and things like that. What can you give us, like the male perspective on that side of things?
Well, I would say first of all that there's many challenges that apply to most, or perhaps even to all persons here seeking asylum. Just the very journey to get to Trinidad and Tobago sometimes is quite a precarious one. Persons are often, in addition to being sort of like having to leave their home in a very, very quick manner, sometimes overnight, sometimes without any notice, having to just grab whatever belongings they have around them, and then having to seek refuge and travel by whatever means is available to them is dangerous. It puts certain categories of person more at risk. For example, children and women are usually, you find, more likely to become victims of trafficking based on the profiles that we see of persons coming in. Persons with specific needs, with physical disability, may find it a bit more difficult to make the journey and so on. So that's just the transit part of it. When arriving here, persons, one of the biggest challenges, of course, the language barrier. So persons who simply cannot effectively communicate the reason for being here, or cannot communicate effectively their circumstances. The lack of legal documentation is often quite an impediment, even though it should be recognized that people who are fleeing don't often have the opportunity to have the documents that they should have when making international travel. And then you have, aside from, I think it's quite well documented, the socioeconomic issues that stem from the lack of right to work and study, labor exploitation, and so on that happens. You regularly hear stories of non-nationals doing the same job as locals and being paid a fraction of the salary that locals are paid. For example, oftentimes you'd hear things like employers seizing passports and documents of workers to keep them on, and to sort of like continue exploit. So a lot of exploitation happens, and that is not specific to men. It happens across the board. A big risk factor faced by children is the lack of access to the formal education system. Children, education is important not only as a way and a means to help a child to grow and develop, to become a productive adult, but also in situations of conflict. Education is the number one sort of like protective tool that helps to mitigate trauma, that helps to build a child's resilience, and that helps to sort of give them the tools necessary to self-actualize and live the best life that they can live in the future, right? So the fact that there is not access to formal education here is a huge concern for children who are here. Persons with specific needs and persons with very serious health concerns, for example, there's a imperfect access to healthcare. So generally speaking, non-nationals can access primary healthcare, but beyond the primary level, there's no sort of like public access to them. And as we all know, private healthcare is quite expensive and can be quite exclusionary, particularly if the medical professionals don't speak the language of the persons of concern. But I would say, notwithstanding the seriousness of all of those things, perhaps the number one challenge that is faced by all refugees and asylum seekers around the world, and is not different here, is xenophobia and discrimination. So,
definitely.
I'm sure you want to come to that a bit later on, but that I would say that that is something which it's not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. Obviously, it's something which occurs all over the world.
Yeah, we saw that in Germany, we saw it in the US.
Any level of xenophobia whatsoever is too high. So it's something which really does not only affect the individual situation of people, but it really it sort of like affects the narrative that we sort of like build, or that is socialized into us about human beings essentially, and it causes people to dehumanize other humans, and that leads to a whole host of other social problems. So
it does.
Right.
Even, and I know we want to get into xenophobia, which is a big topic, but I just want to, because sometimes these issues aren't humanized. I really want I really want to bring it home. What Mattieu was saying about, and also to talk about women, which we could definitely talk about as part of xenophobia. It's all connected, but to bring what Mattieu said home, there was a Venezuelan cancer patient, and her name was Dominga Pagola. You would see it in the newsday. This woman was 57. She was facing a form of cancer that was treatable. I had a friend, a Trini friend from the States who didn't fully understand the situation, message me and say, but my friend went to the health center and this was dealt with. And I had to explain to her, well, there are certain procedures that are inaccessible to Venezuelans. They can only access basic health care. So this person who could have received a life-saving procedure that she could not afford did not. There was a GoFundMe set up by her family to raise funds for this woman. I shared it on my social media. I put in some money. I was going really hard because I thought this woman would live. She did not live. She died. And the thing is that I don't think we understand the stories the levels of the stories that we do not hear of people who are disabled at their jobs and can't do anything about it because there's no system in place for them to seek restitution because all they have is a work permit exemption and nothing else. I don't think we understand the levels of, even for people who try to go back or people who can't pay their rent, how much they are being taken advantage of by their landlords. And I specifically mean women in this case, in this situation. I don't think we understand that. I read a comment on Facebook, somebody had said, right, when they were talking about rape, and I'm sorry, I have to use that word that is triggering for some. I don't think they understand the prevalence among Venezuelan women and the fact that these stereotypes getting into xenophobia, the stereotypes of Venezuelan women as over-sexualized and as fetishized, what that actually means when a Venezuelan woman is taken advantage of. We have to talk about these things because these are silent stories that people are holding close in shame because they are shameful, but they're not shameful for the right people. The victim should never feel ashamed. We should feel ashamed for letting people within our borders down. And so it's a real personal issue for me because it's like, with that UN, I have to keep a real straight face. And I mean, I know Mattieu actually dealt with these people more than I did because I was communications and his role is more on the ground, right? But you have to keep a straight face in the face of such death and suffering. And the thing is that, yes, of course, it happens to Trinidadians. Of course, like my mother had a home for abused Trinidadian girls, so I've seen that as well. But the kind of just we don't see our government saying that, you know, there's different treatment coming from above. You know, we don't see people who are suffering being villainized. When it comes to Trinidadians, you know, Trinidadians suffering are not villainized. Well, actually, I might have to eat my words there. But what I mean is that, you know, there's an agreement that when Trinidadians suffer, we understand that they are suffering largely. But when it comes to people of another ethnicity, some people can't see the suffering because there's a barrier of, but they so and so, but they this and that, and the xenophobia that comes in. And those are things we need to talk about because it's not rational.
Mattieu, I want to add something to this quickly, if I could. Thank you so much for bringing in some of those points. I just wanted to add as well. Obviously, COVID-19 has affected everybody globally. I don't think there's anybody in the planet that has not been affected adversely somehow by COVID-19. But it's really important to remember as we outline a lot of the challenges faced by refugees and asylum seekers in particular. The fact that the negative impacts of COVID-19 oftentimes are exacerbated for the most vulnerable, and refugees and asylum seekers are among the most vulnerable populations in the country right now, I would say. So you find like the majority of the, say, for example, the industries that have been shut, have been forced to be shut, are industries which are some of the most popular industries for refugees and asylum seekers to get employment in. Prisons are still bound to rental contracts and so on, and so you have many more people facing eviction. The gender dynamic as well, the gender disparities become much more exacerbated as well under the COVID-19 situation. So you find like there may be certain types of work which men may find easier to get, but like domestic work and so on, which some other people may. Trinidad and Tobago has this like sort of like very, I guess, very antiquated ideal of like gendered employment opportunities. And so, these gendered opportunities that are usually given most often to women are less, sort of like less available. You also find like a lot of increased instances of domestic violence and abuse by Venezuelan partners, but also by Trinidadian partners as well. So there's a huge, if I would say, like a very exacerbated series of effects that really are much more hardly felt in the refugee and asylum seeker community. And so it is really important as we, obviously, again, it's a time for solidarity, and it's a time for everybody to sort of like lift each other up. And as we do that, I think it's really important to understand the disparity, not only in access to services, but also the disparity in terms of how people are affected negatively by the current situation.
Yep.
But
definitely.
I mean, let me ask this then, Mattieu. I think a lot of people as well too have to, become aware of the reality of the situation, which is that Venezuela has close upwards of IOM's numbers is close to 5.4 million migrants that basically living and crossing different borders. You have 1.8 million going over to Colombia, 253,000 to Brazil, 861,000 to Peru, 455,000 to Chile. And if it is you have that level of people moving in that direction, but Trinidad only has the impact on Trinidad is just 40 to 60,000. Wouldn't you say that the government then has a responsibility, and this of course is not one party or the other, this is just the entity of the government, has a responsibility to at least have systems to be able to deal with an influx of refugees, of migrants of around 4% of your country's population?
Well, here's what I will say to that, and Amanda, you can chime in. Feel free. I'm sure you'd have a lot to say about this as well. But first of all, like the entire region has been affected in a way by the situation in Venezuela. So this number you call of 5.4 million, I wouldn't call them migrants. I would say 5.4 million displaced persons due to the situation. And Trinidad and Tobago, obviously being one of the closest countries, will receive a proportionally high number of persons just because of the geographical proximity. But this 5.4 million people, and the number is growing daily, is spread out across the entire Latin American and the Caribbean region. The good thing is, though, that governments don't have to operate in isolation, right? There is currently a situation response for the Venezuela crisis, which is essentially a consortium of UN agencies partnering together with governments, with local agencies in different countries to collectively coordinate the response for the Venezuela situation in the region. They collectively lobby for funds. They help to standardize certain types of responses, to divert or to channel funds that are procured to the most sort of like pressing priorities in each of the countries where it operates. So all the countries that are part of the situation response can benefit from the joint resources and from technical expertise and so on. So no government is operating in a silo or in a vacuum. At the end of the day, sovereign nations all have the right to sort of like determine. It's not for UNHCR or for anybody else to determine, what is the capacity of any particular country to accept refugees. And I don't even think that there is any reliable measure that even a government can necessarily use to come up with a number for how many is the capacity. But what I would do is I would urge people again to just think about what I said earlier, which was that the COVID-19 situation will continue to affect refugees and asylum seekers much more adversely. I think throughout the entire COVID-19 pandemic, something like 168 countries would have put some form of border closure measures in place, right? And 90 of those countries made no exception for refugees and asylum seekers, meaning that, but at the same time, the conflicts and so on continue to rage on in countries forcing place. So you find like more and more people who are forced to leave their country, and sort of like less and less avenues for them to sort of like safely seek shelter. So the situation really is a dire one. And so the UNHCR, as well as other UN agencies, exist really to help support governments. And we remain committed, obviously, to support the government and to work with the government. We have a good working relationship with them, but we remain committed to sort of like help build capacity, help to divert resources, help to not just resources that we can mobilize internally, but to apply for grants and so on, to sort of like help the situation here. So there are there's a lot of benefit to sort of like participating in this mass joint coordination for protection. It means that any country, and Trinidad and Tobago included, will really have the benefit of all of these resources and expertise and so on to help them sort of like better deal with the magnitude of the crisis.
Definitely.
Amanda, what do you think?
Can you just repeat the original question? I was just vibing.
Yeah. So is it that the governments have a response, because it's tied to the xenophobic sort of thing? Because a lot of people look at the xenophobic perspective as a sort of go-to, like a frustration then, and they were like, just get rid of the problem, but not understanding that, in my mind, from the numbers, this is something that will always be part of what needs to be managed by a government. So xenophobia really isn't a legitimate response. The response is really thinking about, let me see if I get the terminology correct. Detection, prevention, and response. So it's a matter of really thinking about the capacity of what systems are being affected, and how are you going to build that capacity as a government entity in order to treat with this reality. In other words, not taking a sort of ostrich-headedness approach. Do you think government has a responsibility in that?
100%. States are sovereign, and they are responsible for managing, protecting, maintaining their borders, as well as the people inside of them. I think you are hitting the nail on the head for every international worker who has had to deal with this issue, in that this is the frustration. The issue has been politicized to the point where the government's response is one of continuing to call Venezuelans economic migrants, despite the fact that it is proven that that is not actually the case, has continued to, again, suggest or allude to the fact that there's a refugee policy being developed while we have not seen anything. Sort of make us think that a refugee policy is something that is a free-for-all, it's like an open door, when no, a refugee policy is exactly what you are describing. It is a procedure, it is a tool, it is a mechanism. It will show everyone from the refugee unit that sits inside the Ministry of National Security to the police stations who might detain Venezuelans, to the courts, to international workers themselves, how to operate. Because right now there's a gray area in which refugees are coming. Some refugees have a work permit exemption, but their children, I mean, when they go to work, their children cannot, there's nowhere for their children to go.
Childcare,
Exactly. So there needs to be a comprehensive managed system, and that system needs to be differentiated and needs to be separated from this sort of political idea that having a system in place means that you are welcoming refugees in or that you are opening your borders. A system is used to manage, because as you said, and as we had both said before, people will not stop coming unless the root cause of why they are coming is fully addressed. I mean, that was the other part of Kamala Harris's conversation that did not get as much publicity. But she was also saying, and I don't agree with her at all, but she was also saying essentially that she would be working with the Mexican government and working with the Guatemalan government, with microfinancing of loans and with issues of corruption that would lead to people having to leave. And that is the thing. Again, deterrence does not work. Instead, what you have to do is to expand legal pathways. So, help people to come in legally who can, and also, while also addressing, a lack of asylum system that is state-run, while also addressing the root causes for people leaving in the first place. And rightly so, Trinidad cannot alone. People say Trinidad is a tiny island, and if we're looking at it on a global scale, the stats really do show that most refugees actually are housed in developing nations. So when Kamala Harris says, and I don't know why I keep going back to it, I guess it's just in my mind, but when when developed countries enforce strict immigration policy in violation of the convention, what that means is that those people who lose the opportunity to then resettle in those countries, or not to reset a different process, but to attempt to seek asylum in those countries, they are, essentially housed in places like Mexico. They are, and Mexico also receives refugees from other countries, and what that essentially means is that, to a degree, I understand the government's frustration in that it says that Trinidad is a tiny country. However, I would love to see the research on capacity, because you can analyze capacity of institutions to see, for instance, we've been doing it for COVID to see how many beds are available, etc., etc. Right. You can analyze capacity of institutions. Have our institutions been taxed by refugees? I haven't seen any release from the government, proving this. So what I would say is that if it is that you, even at the very beginning, where is the data and where is the research? Why is it immediately A to Z, with Z being we cannot let these people in? On what basis? On what grounds? Who have you consulted? Which social, behavioral, urban planners, scientists have you consulted with to determine this? And where's this information publicly available? I would love to see it, first of all. So going back to your point, yes, 100% our government has a responsibility. And I think also some of the rhetoric it is using on the other side, I empathize it with the fact that developing countries, shoulder the burden. But on the other side, as Mattieu said, there are pacts. There's a global compact for refugees. There is the R4V platform, which Mattieu said, and again jargon and acronyms and so on. But basically, there are actual agreements that countries, governments across Latin America are working towards that seek to shoulder the burden of the responsibility of refugees. And I hardly ever see these kinds of pacts and agreements brought up conversation. It's always Trinidad cannot. And the thing is that, okay, so in the same way that we can go, the Prime Minister can advocate with the WHO for vaccine equity for its own people and say, we are a tiny nation and we are not privy, we are in the same way that other countries are to receiving vaccines. Why can it not on a global stage also take that position and say, we are a tiny nation, where, and I know it's that way. I know diplomacy does not work this way, but this is why I'm not a diplomat. I'm an activist. Essentially, why is it that we cannot also take that stance and say, if it is that we are a tiny nation, can we be hospitable to refugees while also advocating that developed countries shoulder the burden as well?
Definitely. You know, when I think about what you're saying, there seems to be a bit of a imbalance in how the situation is being handled. You know, there is a lack of policy, a lack of action on the part of the government, right? When it comes to seeking asylum and all these things, we can see that there's not enough resources put in to making the process as easy as it should, right? Now, what I'm really trying to figure out is, do you think that the government is holding back on, as you said, is it that it looks like if they were to take this seriously and put more efforts into it, that they think that they might get a blowback from their electorate or so on? Do you think that it is just that they are pandering to the people of Trinidad and Tobago by making these decisions not to take the crisis as serious as they are?
I think that it's a few things. Mattieu, do you want to take this at all, or?
I mean, I'm not in a position personally to sort of like make I don't feel qualified enough to sort of like make any judgments of the government process. I don't think I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that they don't take the crisis seriously. And again, I just want to reiterate that obviously, you know, the responsibility is ultimately the government for governance of the country, right? So they have the right to sort of like select their own policies and so on. They have as a sovereign nation, you know, I do believe that across the board, and this is not specific to Trinidad, like more can be done. And this is not only involve the government. I think it is also important not to put the government in a vacuum, because the reality is that the government also does rely on international civil society, but also local actors, and relies on people as well to sort of like help inform them, to keep them in check and so on. So the buck definitely doesn't stop with the government, but all citizens really have a stake in the situation.
Right.
But as much as I will say on that, Amanda.
But it seems to be kind of like this kind of bouncing bubble kind of, you know, because you're saying that the citizens need to show this interest, but then if you know that we're in a nation where we have this kind of callousness that is rife, you know, in society, and the people on top don't, you know, take it upon themselves to go with robust educational campaigns about the situation, you know, how are we supposed to really expect the people to actually you know, change their what seems to be the running view, you know, perspective among people? Because I just want to talk about, you know, we put out an ad for this episode, and it got a lot of traction, right? More traction than anything we ever put out. I don't know what really was the situation for that. And the ad, you know, had an image of the boat and all of that, you know, so it probably put at people's heartstrings, and it's just basically xenophobic rhetoric. You know, that's all that really came out of that ad. And you know, this xenophobia comes from this fear that that you know, we don't have, you know, the resources for Venezuelans. We don't have the space for them. They're going to come and take all the jobs. They're going to come and do this. Just now, you know, they're going to take over. Where does that come from? Who can? I know anybody can answer this. This isn't for any particular, you know, person to answer. As a panel, where do we think that this fear comes from? You know, as people who are all children of immigrants, right? I'm sorry if I was dropping there, guys. But hopefully you guys hearing me. And what I'm really trying to say is that when we look at the brass tacks out there on the streets, right? There is, you know, it's really a lot of callousness and a lot of racism and all of this. You know what I mean? And I just want to know what we think can be done about it. You know, what can be done, because it's serious. It's really, really, I mean, you read in the comments there, what you said it yourself, Amanda, what people go through, what the women go through, you know, like how do we battle this? How do we, and who I mean, everybody has to play a part. So where do we start? You know?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, I've been looking at the comments. You know, but it's a question we need to answer. And I've been looking at the comments, and people have been asking it. You know, how do we eradicate xenophobia? How can I help as an individual? And I think that, I mean, when you say it's multi-layered, it is multi-layered, right? In the same way that we see that there's a lack of a cohesive vaccination campaign from the government, I think it's the same thing. I have heard anti-xenophobia ads on the radio that have been just as offensive. It's like a weird, exaggerated Spanish accent, and a Venezuelan accent, I should say. And I'm just like, who approved this? Like, what? it's just like,
yeah, it's so dumb, you know.
It's so weird. And I'm just like, and it's the same thing with the vaccination issue. There are so many people, there are so many great thinkers and minds in this country. Like, have a think tank put together. And I mean, there are lots of people working on this, by the way, and I don't want to discredit that. There are people burning out working on this, but people are working, from my experience, a lot of different silos, based on like lines of funding. You know, where's your funding coming from? Based on different ministries and different units. UNHCR tries to be an aggregator of people, but it sometimes is, I mean, the R4V platform that's what it's supposed to be, but it doesn't always work out that way. You know, you'll see like different pockets of people who are really trying to help. I think that in the same way that, and I've studied this to try to find the answer. And for me, I think it's the same approach as you would take if you're convincing somebody the vaccine, right? And that doesn't negate, you know, years of again, kind of Venezuelan, Trinidadian tensions and so on. But you have to kind of get intimate with it. You have to go to, I think, the simplest common denominator, which is like a family unit. And so when it is that you hear your partner or your relative talking about refugees or Venezuela or the Venice or whatever, to correct them and say, no, that's not the case. Because if you don't do it, who will? And then that, you know, spirals into, okay, maybe that person is the manager of a restaurant who is exploiting his workers and paying Venezuelans less. Maybe that person is inclined to assault. You know, it's like, pull up your partner, pull up your friend. If it is that your father's a business or your mother's a I don't know if you could see, it says the stream is kind of cutting up, so I hope you can hear me. But
yeah,
we're hearing you now. It just cut off a little bit, but we're hearing you now.
Okay. Okay, cool. That's what I would say. I mean, I would also say things like, I mean, COVID makes it difficult, but, you know, consider things like going to Living Water or UNHCR if it is that you are seeking a particular kind of service. You know, for instance, somebody who might be able to teach you Spanish and has actually learned through your church, through local organizations, actually working, you know, if you belong to a religious group, working with them to find ways to, you know, to get food to Venezuelans. But I think also it is about counteracting the negative messages, about having conversations. I think the conversations thing is one of the most important. But the thing that, as you said, that can't happen by itself. You know, that was the hardest lesson I had to learn, that I can't change Trinidad by myself. I can't counteract messages coming from the government that are heavily politicized because, you know, they might want to please an electorate, or because they might be competing with the opposition who is also xenophobic, or because you know, it's like I can't compete with that. So I think what really needs to happen is a greater degree of cooperation, a greater degree of empathy. And I hope, I mean, a change has happened, a shuffle has happened in the cabinet that I hope will yield some positive results, because is an issue. But another thing, I know you kind of want to move on, but another thing I would say is that what I'm beginning to do is to also understand. I used to be real angry, and Katsu, you'd probably know because we're Facebook friends, right? I used to be real angry at Trinidadians and used to basically take no prisoners. But I kind of had to understand something, which is that there's a, that feeling that, for instance, Venezuelan women are prettier or more attractive, that then leads to them being more at risk or at risk for assault. That feeling, the outcome, horrible, but the feeling, legitimate, because it comes from a space of being told that, as darker skinned people, you might not be as attractive. As Trinidadians, you might not be attractive. I start to understand a little bit more. It's like that feeling that people will take your jobs. If you look at the research, that doesn't actually happen. Refugees tend to be entrepreneurs and they tend to add to economies. This is a fact. But a lot, the government registration process happened right after Petrotrin, layoffs. So of course, people were feeling as though Trinidad is in a shaky state, and that leads then to all of the rhetoric.
Well,
so
that's the
basically
thing,
kind of understanding, but not agreeing.
It's just so sad because out here it's just it's so shaky, all the time with so much shit, and the average person just, I guess, it is a kind of some kind of survival instinct kicking in here that is sadly where we at as people, because it's like as soon as you step out your door, it's like survival of the fittest kind of thing now, So I don't know, it's just real confusing at times, and it's very sad. There was I think at this point in time, Torian, we'd want to take in some of the comments.
Before you move on, I want to add something real quick.
No problem. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you. Just to say that, in addition to everything, obviously Amanda said, even though there's a lot of xenophobia that definitely does exist, I think it's really important to point out that there's also quite a lot of many people who are very sympathetic and empathetic to the situation. There are a lot of individuals, formal and informal groups, local organizations who do a lot, and so I think it's really important to connect. If you do care about the situation and you are passionate about it, in addition to getting more information, and information is out there, there are many sources of information that I and my colleagues will be happy to point you to give you more context into the entire situation, both abroad and locally, but more so. And more than just having these dialogues, because these dialogues are important, but it's really important to act as individuals. So when you see, if you encounter a non-national, someone discloses to you they're a refugee, they're an asylum seeker, they're a migrant, if you can get to know them, overcoming language barrier is a great skill for everybody. I'd never heard anybody say that learning another language or understanding another culture to be a negative thing. So the more we can actually engage in the practices of bridging the gap between one another, so having these discussions, connecting to the information, but also joining the efforts that exist or forming your own efforts within your community. If you find, or if you know of someone in your community, a refugee and asylum seeker who maybe seen some trouble, maybe you can show, it doesn't have to be anything big, but show them some good neighborly Trinidadian hospitality and so on. And that really is where I think the seeds are planted and where the situation can change. We have to be the one. We are the vanguard of this. We are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and this is Mattieu, not Mattieu, the UNHCR Senior Community-Based Protection Assistant. This is Mattieu, the Trini, saying that I have a lot of faith, despite some of the things we see daily on social media. I have a lot of faith in the spirit of our people, and I really feel as if now is the time in this exceedingly difficult moment that we are all facing. Now is the time for us to kind of rise up and really embody, a lot of the things that we evoke when talking about our independence and our vibrancy and so on is rooted in this idea of diversity, in this idea of acceptance, and this idea that we are more than just the sum of our parts, and we have an intricate history with not only with Venezuela, but with Latin American countries in general, a huge influence on our culture. And so we need to sort of recognize these things and start to value some of these things and use them as building blocks to really bridge the divide that exists.
Everybody vexed with Spanish until it's Christmas time, and it's time to sing parang and eat pastel.
I'd say they're gonna say. Christmas time is parang. I mean, where parang come from? You understand?
Exactly.
And when you look at the news, you know, you see that there's the Venezuelan fisherman who given out fish, if I'm not mistaken, things like that. You see these kind of gestures of solidarity and brotherhood. These people are not just here to leech off anything. You know, these are human beings who want to come and you know, they are, as we spoke about earlier, they are asylum seekers, right? God forbid that there's a day when me myself, you know, I have to become an asylum seeker. Do I want to go somewhere and everybody say, well, what she? You understand? I mean, people put yourself there. It's not far-fetched, you know. I don't find it far-fetched, right? I mean, if somebody said it in the comments there. There was also the story about the is it a boxer, let's see? The person who
yes, who got the scholarship to go to refugee scholarship to go to the Olympics, and he confirmed he's going to the Olympics and so on now, and from Venezuela, you know.
Right.
So
you know, so
competing under that, yeah.
So it's not all doom and gloom, you know, people. You know, we when you think about it, we're a young nation and we're still developing, and our history shows us that, you know, that people come to this land and we all bring something here and we live in this kalaloo, as we say. So I mean, I don't know what it is we're so afraid of, but let's take some of the questions here, Torian. So question 1 from Narad. A pirogue has been spotted crossing the 7-mile mark, heading for Cedros. The TT government, TTCG, police prepares to receive A, economic migrants, B, refugees, asylum seekers, or C, a mix. Anybody want to tackle that? And if so,
SAT question.
Well, okay.
Matthew, do you want to ask somebody who currently?
I would say that ideally, if the Coast Guard is present, obviously, then they have their procedures. So they greet the vessel and they sort of like interview the persons who are there, find out why they are there. It should be common knowledge that a lot of these boats are coming from lands that speak Spanish. So hopefully there would be the capacity to be able to communicate with the persons there on the vessel to understand a bit more about the situation. And it's really important, I guess, to allow, if there is a sense that persons are seeking asylum.
Oh, if there's a sense that they're seeking asylum, he'll be back. If there's a sense that they're seeking asylum, I would go. I know he's getting to the point that that most likely that the protocol should be that they would go through the channels. But Amanda, just to touch on something, or Matthew, if Matthew's back here, so you are at the point where you say if they are seeking asylum, if you establish that they're seeking asylum, Matthew, you're saying
there's no way to spot a vessel and automatically know what the reason is there. So there would need to be some interaction, and I mean we've already spoken in some detail as to what the process looks like locally and what we feel the process should look like. Obviously we are not advocating for the Coast Guard and so on not to do their jobs. Obviously, local law enforcement have their mandates and they have to uphold the laws of the country, and that is understood, and that is the bare minimum that is expected of them, of persons who are expected to do their jobs, right? But what we advocate for really is a bit more understanding as to the reasons behind why these vessels may be there in the first place. Understanding of, for example, what these people are really fleeing, and then this is more than just seeing the condition of a boat and so on. It's really understanding what's going on a day-to-day basis in the world, and basically making an informed decision based on what is presented before you. So, obviously, I would dare to think that it is fairly sort of like a lot easier potentially to distinguish between, say, a boat filled with women and children and families and so on, versus like other types of vessel that maybe are there. So I would just say that the processes exist for this reason, to ensure that people are not unfairly sort of like discriminated against, and I must continue to sort of like advocate that ideally should be what the procedure is.
Definitely.
I want to answer the question too.
Yes.
I will answer that question as a student who comes with the time and answer.
Right.
And I'm from a country, Jamaica, a Caribbean country that actually has a refugee policy, you can understand what I mean by and mechanism. The Jamaican refugee policy states where an individual is delivered on land or where he or she arrives by sea, the JCF, which I believe is the Jamaican Defense Force, sorry, I should know this, should be the official point of contact. No, the JCF is the Coast Guard. Where an individual is rescued at sea by the Jamaica Defense Force, he or she shall be entrusted to the care or custody of the JCF. The appropriate divisional officer of the JCF shall, where possible, language and medical condition permitting, certain information from the individual, such as his or her name, country of origin, and date of and reason for departure of his or her country. The JCF shall inform the Ministry of National Security within 24 hours about the arrival of such persons. The appropriate divisional officer shall, where necessary, etc., 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 etc. So what I mean, that is me making my point, which is that there should be no guesswork. There should not be a B or C. There should be a procedure which clearly identifies if a member of the Coast Guard locates a boat out at sea, here is the procedure that is taken.
And we don't have those procedures set in stone here, really and truly.
We have, nope, all we have is an Immigration Act that criminalizes illegal entry.
And there you have it, folks. And there you have it. Question from Saeed. What do the government, local institutions need to do to reduce the exploitation of refugees, migrants? So we had that earlier. That was probably asked earlier, and I know we touched on that. But if we want to put it in a nutshell,
I would say the most impactful thing that possibly could be done would be improving access to basic rights. So access to right to work and study to earn decent wages and so on. I think you'll find that the vast majority of people that I have encountered in the context are people who, regardless of what background they come from, are really sort of like willing to do whatever they can to sort of like help themselves and their families to survive. They just really are looking for the right to work safely, to have some job security and to not be exploited. So putting policies in place to ensure that, I think would not only be helping Trinidad and Tobago to sort of like better accede to its responsibilities under the Refugee Convention, but would also go a long way to improving the situation. And I think, just also, an honest examination of laws and policies, informed by data and informed by evidence. So speaking to refugees and asylum seekers and actually understanding, not just going off of what the prevailing narrative is, but using the stories and the actual anecdotes from people and what they have experienced, and particularly the negative experiences that they have had under the current systems, not as a way to bemoan or to admonish anybody, but to use in a constructive way to improve policies, to plug gaps. And I think it requires a considered effort. It will obviously require the government to prioritize it, but it will also require continued cooperation and collaboration with UN agencies, international bodies, and other local actors. So
definitely. Mm-hmm. From Angel de Dios.
Angel.
Right? Mm-hmm. Angel. What future is anticipated for the Venezuelan migrants in TNT?
I hope a future that you deserve, and a future that all humans deserve. I hope it is a future that sees you and your children having the rights to an education. I hope it is a future that sees you being able to have whatever educational certification that you've arrived with evaluated, and the word isn't coming to me, and translated and given a chance to actually help you to get better jobs.
Definitely.
In reality, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I really, really hope it will.
Mm-hmm.
What do either of the guests here think about the relationship between our government and the Venezuelan government with respect to this issue? Anybody can chime in on that? What they think about our government's relationship with the Venezuelan government when it comes to this issue.
Can I just thank Siobhan for saying accredited, which was the word I was struggling for.
Yes. The accreditation board.
Oh my God.
Man like that. And the accreditation board.
Right. I am not personally in a position to make any comments on that aspect of it, but what I will say is that organizations like UNHCR, they have its mandate regardless. Our mandate is focused on people, and regardless of whatever relationship that exists, we are mandated to sort of like protect the rights of displaced persons, and so we are basically informed in our work by the various international instruments, which not only guide, which not only form the basis of our very existence, but which also, broadly ascribe what the responsibilities of us are, what the responsibilities of different countries are. So we are very much guided by a rights-based approach. Obviously, it's important to be cognizant of what the socio-political climate is. But like I say, me as an individual, I'm not really in a position to comment on that tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, anything there, Amanda?
Oh yeah, for sure. Can we not use the word Venice? Just looking at the questions, yes, we should never use the word Venice. I have sat in rooms with media professionals who have justified the use of the word Venice because it's too long for a headline, as though Trinidadian is not also a long word, just so we know the levels. Are we aware? My question, I don't, this question is actually about media. But the question before about the relationship, Mani Singh has said, are we aware of the relationship? And I don't think anything. I just have so many questions. I don't fully understand
Same here.
I don't fully understand what is being received on both sides of a seemingly comfortable political relationship between both of our governments. I don't fully understand why it is that our government cannot is in a political position where it has to deny the existence of refugee and instead prefers to say economic migrants. I don't fully understand. I don't think I have reached that level of knowledge. I don't think I've graduated to that level of knowledge to fully understand why it is that
the too much heights.
The heights. I don't understand the heights.
Me too.
I don't understand.
Hopefully one day we get them in the room to show you the heights,
Listen, hopefully. I don't, but that is the gist of it. Like I said, I'm not a diplomat, so maybe that's why I don't get it. But I don't fully understand what is the benefit of the relationship on either side politically, and why it is justifying, violations of conventions and human rights abuses. That's Definitely. I don't fully understand it.
Well, it's simple, straightforward question here. Scene 2. We have an embassy there.
Yeah.
It's okay. Right, and that's right.
There was a media question as well.
Yes.
Sorry.
Is there anything that can be done about the way the media portrays Venezuelan migrants, like the use of the words Venice, etc.? Amanda, hit me there first, Amanda.
Yeah. Sorry. There's a lot to say. I was just looking at. I was observing some of the questions coming in. Is there anything that can be done? Yeah, my job actually used to be one in which I was communications associate at UNHCR. It was my job to liaise with the media. What do I think can be done? I think more conversations. I think that there's a need to understand how the media. And this is on the UNHCR side, and this is me reflecting on things that I could have done better in my role, which was, to understand how the media operates, and that it is under some real pressure to churn out articles very quickly and to have headlines that are eye-catching, and that those headlines will be xenophobic because xenophobia is eye-catching. And it is because that xenophobic headline saying the Venice so-and-so or two Venice, one Trinidad, they know what they're doing, right? And it is to capture attention. It is clickbait, really. To reason with them and to understand that they are creative. And when I say reason, I mean through workshops, through trainings, through conversations, I think my parents really enjoying CSI. I don't know why I heard so much coming from the next room. But basically, to kind of to have more conversations to understand that it is the media is also complicit in creating a narrative, and that also in countries, and I know this is good from A to Z, but in countries, for instance, that have suffered genocide, the media's narrative is always complicit in a step. It escalates. It's an escalation of complicity from the media, from the government, that leads to then one group being so alienated that atrocities are allowed to be committed against them. So I think we need to understand that the media plays a huge part, but also I think what we need to do is to train some of the young folks, who are learning at UE how to become media professionals, to help them to ensure that Spanish is mandatory, to have programs where they understand how to cover these events, so that when they are in control of the media, so to speak, that they understand, how to manage it. But the narrative, but the thing is that I have seen good media coverage, I have seen awful media coverage, but I think I would love to see more critical media coverage that fact checks the government in ways that we see in America, media coverage that will challenge the use of the term economic migrants, and media coverage that is more rooted in an understanding of asylum systems and how they work.
Media coverage that is not afraid to challenge, to challenge certain things. There are certain things that need to be challenged, and the media does not seek to challenge these things. They rather just go with some bacchanal story, and everybody read and say, "Oh, good boy, that is what's going on there." But to say that we take that approach to challenge certain mindsets, certain the zeitgeist, as they say, right? I mean, we could hope. I'm seeing one here. I think our government know what their relationship is with Venezuela better. There's one from Kamiram. What happens to refugees who have been unfortunately displaced from rental apartments due to eviction? Where can they go?
That's a tough one, and obviously as the situation rages on, the pandemic rages on, as things continue to be closed, situation, as I said, continues to get worse and worse for many people, for all persons, regardless of nationality, who are out of work by the situation. I would say that UNHCR and its part. So UNHCR, first of all, I mentioned that we don't operate in a silo here. We operate and we are able to operate actually with the collaboration of many local and international organizations. So here locally, we partner with three main organizations: Living Water Community, the Rape Crisis Society of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago. But we also frequently collaborate with a number of other organizations, such as La Casita, Helping Hearts Association, Is It Not a Cause, and many others. The Archbishop's Office, the Archdiocesan Ministry for Migrants and Refugees, etc., etc. And then, so through this collaborative work, there does sort of like exist avenues to help people out. Obviously, these areas of assistance are by no means a substitute for people having the ability to earn wages for themselves, and definitely the number of resources available probably is not enough to help out every single individual or family who is in need of, say, money to pay their rent or so on. But there are programs that exist. So persons, the UNHCR website, which I can ask, the TT website, which I can ask the host to put up in a short while, does outline services and does have links to different services and the different partner organizations. I would say that persons can also turn to local agencies. So oftentimes your local parish, your local religious organization. There's lots of things going on in the communities, and so generally what happens is that when we get wind of somebody who is in a situation like this, if we are not in a position to directly assist, we try our best to use our connections to sort of like try and source solutions to people. But like I say, it is very situation based, and it isn't always the case that we have the resources or that we can find the resources in a timely manner for those people who are in dire need. So what does all this mean? Basically, it means that as we continue to kind of push on through this crisis, we need an all hands on deck kind of approach. People out there, especially those who haven't been that affected by the situation, like you can feel free if you're feeling philanthropic. There's organizations you can donate resources to and so on. I think that there's probably a lot more capacity than we realize in this country to help those in need. So yeah, that's my plug at the end of this, is basically to say that we there's a lot of things that we do, but
yeah,
we need a lot more resources and a lot more sort of like attention on this situation. So.
And we really do hope that help comes and that we can all work together on this. Amanda, is there anything you want to say? Because you're looking to close up very soon because we're hitting that 2 hour mark. So let's just get into that and then get into closing remarks.
Yeah, boy. For me, my closing remarks would be, just do it. Just help them.
Right.
That's literally what I'm doing right now. And we can all do it if we have an income. If we have an income, like, you're lucky. You're one of the lucky ones. Seriously, So I'm literally like now budgeting, which I never do. I am not a grown up. Like budgeting for this is the amount I'm giving per month to people and trainees as well who need food for groceries. So that I know when I'm freelancing, like, I have my thing set up so I know that this job equals this amount of money equals this is who I'm going to help. Like, I have it set up. Because if you don't help, then nobody, you can't wait on the government. Also, Siobhan had mentioned infospot.org, infospott.org. It's a resource for Venezuelan migrants and refugees who need information and assistance. So thanks, Siobhan, for that. That's just my closing comments. Don't wait.
Yeah, don't wait. And we will put all these resources, Mattieu, like all the websites and so on. We'll make a post. So everybody who's looking on, any information you're going to want after this, we will have the links there for you all on the Facebook page. Okay. I'm seeing a real interesting thing there I just want to touch on quickly. We have to understand the connotations that come with certain words and how they are being used and how and what they have come to mean. So just like, we look at Trini and we say, well, that's what Veni is, but the way it is used, the connotation of it has changed from just being an abbreviation. All right. So these things are nuanced, and we really have to get knowledgeable as a people. But again, that comes with some form of educational outreach. Mattieu, any closing remarks on the topic and your time here with us?
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, thanks to you all for providing the space for us to have this discussion. We need to have more discussions along these lines. Always a pleasure, of course, to be talking about these things alongside a dear friend as Amanda. But just to say that, like, there's always more that can be done. This is me speaking again from my taking off my professional hat and speaking as a Mattieu, the Trini to the bone. Like, I really do feel passionate about our capacity to rise up above the challenges that we've been facing. I've seen it in many small pockets. I've seen groups of friends and people who have been like digging deep and trying to help those in need. And I think it really it starts with having the will to make changes, having the will to stand up, having the will to speak out against discrimination, having the will to sort of like act in ways that you feel compelled to based on seeing the human side of certain situations. So just want to encourage people, keep love in your heart and understand that, like, really try to put yourself in the shoes of refugees, of migrants, of asylum seekers, of the people that you see. When you hear people saying derogatory things about Benny this and Spanish that, I want you to try and actually literally try to put yourself in the shoes of those people. Try to understand what it is like, how bad the situation have to be for a mother or a father or a grandmother to take their young children on a precarious journey across the ocean without any guarantees that they will have rights and that they'll even be able to speak the language. Like, think about how bad the conditions have to be for people to want to voluntarily put themselves in these situations, and it'll help you really to understand the real human side of it. And other than that, just kind of keep safe, look out for your neighbors, and thanks for this space again.
Right. Thank you so much, Mattieu. And Mattieu, I'll just have you know that you make a little history tonight too, because he's the first press man we had on the show so far. So big up,
big up.
You know
the
banter must be there, but it's our one love. I keep loving your heart, right?
Lucky you didn't say that.
Glad to see you all improving gradually as things go along.
Torrance is a good thing we didn't say that in the earlier part of the program. You might want to stop the program or kind of thing. You see, I don't speak the times properly. I speak with that properly. Amanda, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show and sharing with us all your insights. It's so good to have you. Let's see, anything we want to say to close off the vibes?
But just for people to keep holding people to account as well. We need leadership to get us through these difficult problems. And I could tell you all, for those who know me, know that I born and grew up in Cedros. So I know the reality of Venezuelans coming in. And the question that Narad asked is because Narad is from, his dad is from Cedros as well. So those questions that he asked is questions that being asked since I was year high. And the questions haven't changed. So that means that the leadership needs to do better. We can't be in the same position we was in then. And as we always do, Qatar, this is probably, I think, our 15th episode or so. As the episodes come on, we will be doing follow-ups of episodes. And we definitely unpacked a lot in terms of understanding the frameworks and so on. But the next episodes will go more into suggestions of how to make things better. Because there's a lot of very structured things that people could do. But just as in the media, in the situation with the media, we have to hold those in position to account because the leadership needs to be better.
Definitely. We want to thank our roving keyboard man, Torian, in and out. Right?
Yes,
Right, Torian, thank you for managing this episode so lovely.
Pulling it together.
I see we have a lot of people still on, and we clock how much we clock here, but we hit that 2 hours there, people. So I know everybody back hurting and thing. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thanks for all the questions. We will follow up with this topic at a later time, but for now we're signing off. Thank you all so much again. One love. Heights room, bless out. I'll get them all Rockman thing there in the end. So,
yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, give thanks.
Later. Bless.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.